This week, Dr. Evan Longin back, who hasn't been on the show, friend of the show, Dr. Evan Longin, who's back on the show, who was on the show back in February, episode 36, who wrote a book called The Roots of Evil. I don't know if you have it with you, put it up here on, there it is, The Roots of Evil, on the things that make people evil. Or as he came to be known after the last podcast, Dr. Evil Knievel. He chose to be known as that. But the last time you were here, we had a long discussion on these things, and we talked for almost an hour, and there were so many questions that were left unanswered that I looked at all the questions, and I've got all of these questions that we never got to because Steph and Suzanne talk so much, but they're not here to interrupt this time. So we're going to get to all those questions. But first, as a recap, in your book, you define evil and what makes people evil. So as a recap, for those that either didn't listen or forgot what we talked about last time, please define what evil is and what makes people evil. Those four things.
So my definition of evil is a socially constructed definition, and it's based on four factors. The first one is power over behavior. The second one is binary thinking. The third one is control of information. And the fourth is overly simplistic solutions to complex problems. And I wrote this book hoping to warn the public about what was coming in the next months and years. And my fears have come to be true. I was very concerned that Donald Trump, in particular, was going to bring into the marketplace those four factors. And the biggest problem I have in reviewing my book and thinking about the things I was warning people about is I didn't spend enough time talking about why those ideas could take hold in a society such as ours. How could such a robust democracy choose someone who's an evil clown to be its president? How could one of the greatest societies in history, Germany, choose such a maniac as Adolf Hitler? And so, despite the fact that I tried to identify the things that Trump stood for and believed in as problematic, I didn't concern myself enough with how angry and fearful the population is. Now, I got to ask you, Dimitri, I do not understand how Florida could vote red. Florida, who's been inundated by catastrophe after catastrophe from climate change, and MAGA doesn't believe in climate change, where there is mass shooting after mass shooting, and MAGA believes in everybody having guns and running around with them. How MAGA and the red state Florida could choose to continue being red when they're trying to ban books and change the nature of history. They're trying to make slavery sound like it was a pleasure for Black people. How can this happen in a state such as Florida with such great universities and so many intelligent people? Here's my question. How much fear and hate must there be in order for Florida facing these issues would vote continuously red? You tell me that.
Well, I mean, we discussed this last time I have a theory on people, and we're going to get into this, but
Yes.
you're the psychologist. And you tell me, like, what was your reaction to the election and how that went? How did you
Oh,
react?
again, we had a choice. We had a choice of somebody who wasn't telling the truth, who continuously put up falsehoods, used vile language, uh, has been convicted of multiple problems, um, and turned down someone who was trying to bring together a coalition of past Republicans, liberals, people who were thinking to try to preserve the greatness of our country. It was so disheartening that over 50% of our country voted for madness.
Now, some people believe that social media created this kind of culture, this kind of hate. I'm of the belief that social media exposed it, that this
Yes.
has always been festering. What do you think? Do you think social media created it, or do you think social
No,
media
I think
exposed it?
social media uh, di- um, uh, exploited it. They saw the reality that there was so many people who were fearful that we were losing our white Protestant male dominated culture, and was frightened of the idea of a plural society of people of multiple races and creeds coming together to work together. And obviously, there are more people who are subject to that fear than I would have liked to believe.
Okay. So then what's the solution to this? What's the solution to this evil problem?
Well, I think um, Kamala Harris had the solution, which is to come together, to support one another, to love one another, to build on the uh, community connections and move forward. Now, that's going to take a lot of work over the next 4 years. We are going to have to get out and demonstrate to people that we have a commonality, that we have an ability to work together, and we don't and shouldn't fear one another. If we do, we will corrupt the government and the future. So I need to spend more time getting out in the public and working for the good. I tried to do it in the Middle East. I didn't do very well there either. Uh, but in my time in Israel and Palestine, I tried to bring people together to show their common nature. It's so interesting. You look at a society like the Middle East, Jews and Muslims have so much more in common than they have in opposition to one another. I would eat in a Jewish home, and then I would eat in a Muslim home and have the same meal. They have the same requirements, uh, essentially, for their kosher way of living. They come from the same cloth, and yet there is such animosity and fear of one another
Because
because there are powers that be that see the advantage to keeping people divided, because there are people who benefit from strife, and they have a great deal of access and power in the media and social media.
so if people desire that kind of power and they hold on to it through fear, how do you solve the problem of how do you solve the crisis of power through
Well,
fear?
again, that's what I'm saying. Power over behavior is one of the criteria for evil.
Right. So how
Binary
do you
thinking.
solve that?
Yeah,
How do you
how do we
solve that?
solve it? Again, I think we have to educate people to alternative ways of being. To the benefit. Look, I don't see how people perceived they were going to benefit from Trump's uh, um economic vision. You know, they kept saying he had a better vision. He didn't have a vision. His only vision that he had economically was to create tariffs. And those are going to translate into higher costs for Americans. I don't see how they saw he was going to bring stability to the world. He's going to support Putin. Um, I am so fearful that the greatest alliance um, created, NATO, is in jeopardy. Not only is Ukraine in trouble, but countries like Poland are in trouble. Not only are they threatened in Eastern Europe, they're threatened in the Far East, Taiwan. When they see that they can get away with attacking Taiwan and America is going to back away from it, we're going to see that country disappear. It's very scary to me. And yet we didn't get across to people the danger of what they were voting for. Again, I think it only comes from people like you, Dimitri, having people like me talk and get these ideas out to the public.
Okay. Well, look, as you know, I had this theory of people, and I have been pushing this for years. I've been pushing this, and I put this up to you last time, and we were having a great discussion about it. And then, of course, Suzanne interrupted it because she can't just let people have a discussion about it. She always has to get in the middle of it. So I want to bring this up again.
Okay.
Okay. And I showed you the chart, and I don't know if you remember it, but I'll put it up for you again.
Yeah.
If you want, and then I'll remind you of the discussion that we had. Here is the chart. Let me show it to you one more time. Can you see that?
Yeah.
All right. So my theory on it, and for the audio audience, the non-YouTube audience, it's a plot chart where the x-axis is greed, and it goes from one side all the way to the other, and the y-axis is ignorance. And my theory of people is that we are born with two major drives. And the drives are, we are inherently self-interested, which I label as greed, and we are inherently unknowing, which I label as ignorance. And through time, as we grow, we learn information, which makes us less ignorant. And we learn to live in a society and learn that there are other people besides besides us, that have needs in the world besides ours. And we learn to give up certain self-interested needs to share, to live in a community, that we give up certain greedy notions. Because if you look at children, it's always about me, and they don't really know anything. It's what we go to school, we learn to live in a society, and you usually give these things up. But if people don't learn to give these things up, you get this certain plot chart. And if you look at the plot, you get people that are inherently overly greedy, but are not as ignorant. In other words, they're, I don't want to say smart, because smart is not the word, but that are less, that are more knowledgeable about the way the world works, are not that take advantage of people, I would say, that are less knowledgeable about the way things works. You get CEOs, like I would put Elon Musk in this category, where they're ridiculously greedy, but they give out misinformation, that they know for sure is misinformation, stuff like that. When you put people at the end of greedy, but also that believe in nonsense, you're talking mega church leaders and stuff like that. And you could put all these plots and, plug them in wherever you want.
Yes.
But that, I think, is the drive. And as I remember, as I rewatched our original discussion, you told me that you believe that this is true if societies um, if society's norms start to break down, because you believe that people people's natural drives were love and curiosity.
Yes.
And I'm not going to fully disagree that people have the natural drive for love and curiosity, but I would say that that's also not inconsistent with my points, because
No, and it's
curiosity.
not inconsistent. It's the other side of your.
Correct, because curiosity is just ignorance. It's just the strive to be less ignorant, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And love is is not also inconsistent with greed.
Right.
It's just another another drive. But I
Yeah.
would also point out that, you're right in that this can be what happens when society breaks down, and it actually makes my point for me, because it absolutely what happened when society will break down. And I would argue that, look at what's going on around us. Is society breaking down? No, but look at the way people view society, in essence. Um, look around how people look around, and if you talk to people, what are they afraid of? You got one side that's saying, well, if we elect this guy, democracy is going to fall apart, and he's the next Adolf Hitler, and that's going to be the end of a country. That is the end of society, right? They're basically fearing the end of society. And you got the other side saying, well, if we elect the other side, they're going to take away our right to say things and speak,
And
and
the
freedom of
things we value.
speech.
Yeah.
And people are going to kill babies, and they're afraid of that society's going to break down. So it's not that society is breaking down, but they're the fear of society breaking down. And so you're starting to get these impulses coming out of greed and fear. Um, and that's how you get these people getting elected. It's the pit. It's the manifestation of these impulses in these leaders. Because Donald Trump is literally the embodiment of greed and ignorance manifested in a human being. And he was elected by a bunch of people who think society will break down if the other person is elected.
Yes.
So tell me how my theory of people is wrong.
I don't think it's wrong. I think it's just I think you're right. I think it's a different way of analyzing the forces that drive us. I think when we look at the course of history, people in power. Let's go back to the formation of the Christian church. I mean, I think Jesus was one of the great philosophers of all time. He was certainly the greatest Jewish boy that ever lived. And and his goal was to confront the society and say, you're not living by your teachings. So what did the Christian church institute at the Council of Nicaea? A, uh, a system of hierarchy that was just the opposite of what Jesus taught. Now, why did they do that? Because all of a sudden, they didn't believe people would follow ethics, good teachings. They decided they would promote a structure because they didn't trust in the people. That goes way back 2,000 years ago. The powers that be saw the public as being ignorant and not wanting them to have the opportunity to develop their natural instincts because they thought they would be bad. Well, that's really unfortunate, isn't it? So we see over and over again Leo Strauss, who is the father of neoconservatism, who taught at the philosopher who taught at the University of Chicago. He was a victim of the Holocaust. And he said, the people can't be trusted. They will follow dictates that are against their better interests. So you can say anything you want as long as it fights against totalitarian beliefs. Well, that's a problem. It's not trusting the basic nature of people to make good judgments. We go back to Plato. Plato said we should be governed by philosophers because the public is ignorant and they will make bad decisions. Again, I disagree. I believe given the opportunity, people will make better decisions, but we don't trust them. Fox News doesn't trust people.
But Evan, clearly they don't make good decisions.
Well, it's because they get misinformation from the people who they trust.
But they can't. But people don't know how to get good information. They're getting misinformation, but people don't know how to vet proper information.
Well, that's a problem, isn't it?
But that's because they don't know how to do that, because they don't know how to make decisions for proper information. Like I had a conversation. I was in Canada last month, and I was talking to a Canadian about Canadian and American politics, and he was a Canadian, and he was making the same misinformation mistakes that Americans were doing. And it's not just Americans. Like, people can't make correct information decisions. They don't know how to vet information. They make the same mistakes. I told him that January 6th was run by MAGA Trump Republicans.
Yes.
He said that's not true.
Yes.
I was like, I can show you a video of people that are Trump people, Trump flags. He said, okay, produce the video. I produced the video. He denied that the video was real. Like, yes. You know what I mean? So
what's the answer, Dimitri?
With what?
What's the answer? I mean,
I'm asking you, the psychologist, right? The psychologist that studies evil, that wrote the book on it. That I have the theory for me is that people are inherently this way, and the answer is to take the decision making away from them. You take the decision making away from people. The founding fathers of this country kind of knew that. So what they did was they took the decision making away from one individual, right, the king, and what they did is they spread it out through what they call checks and balances, right? So you wouldn't have a king, you would have a president in one branch that was checked by a second branch, which was then split into two, right? The Senate and a House, which was made up of a bunch of individuals, which was then checked by a third branch, a judiciary, which was then set by a bunch of different branches. The problem with that is, though, they are all run by people, and people can't be trusted to make decisions. And what happens is when you get a bunch of people that have the same thought process, that are all in line with it, and when you have only two parties in a system, and you have one party that controls all of those branches, you essentially have one individual, just a king. And that's essentially what's happening now is you have one guy and you have one party controlling everything. And essentially what you have is a kingdom. And again, when you have people in charge, that's the problem. And what you have to do is you have to create a system where people, it's hard to say that you have people not making the decisions when people are the only ones that can make the decisions, but you have to make the system so difficult to alter that people are forced to compromise, forced to either
So
compromise or
again,
literally nothing gets done.
so that's essentially what Trump believes. He's going to force everybody to believe what he believes.
Right,
And
but what I'm saying is that's what a king does, right? But what you have to
yes,
create is a system where you force people to compromise, to
so
meet in the
I'm going to
middle.
come back to here. I agree. I think collaboration is good. I think people coming together in community is good. Dialogue is good. All those things promote the betterment of society. Now, when I was in Israel, I told this story last time. I had just been to a rally for Bedouins who had been supporters of the state of Israel from its inception. And they were given the right to live under the stars. And all of a sudden, the state of Israel decided that Bedouins were getting in the way of progress, that it was no longer in the interest of such an industrialized society to have nomadic people wandering around with their camels and goats in tents. So they decided that they had to live in housing that they were putting up for them. Of course, they were putting up housing for them in the slums, and they didn't want to live there and they didn't want to give up their way of life. So I went to a rally on behalf of those people before I came home. And it was very exciting. People were very uh, unbelievably pleased that Americans were there supporting them and their style of life. The next day I was on a plane leaving Tel Aviv, and I'm on the plane and I'm sitting next to this fellow who's an Israeli businessman from Tel Aviv. And he said, "What do you do?" I said, I'm here as a educator, psychologist. I came to promote interaction between Jews and Muslims." And he laughed at me. He said, "Oh, yeah, that's a great idea, isn't it?" I said, "Well, don't you think that would be a good start, that we have some dialogue between each other?" He said, "There's no hope." I said, "Did you see me last night on the news?" He said, "Well, why were you on the news?" I said, "I was at a demonstration in Lod." He said, "Oh my God, are you crazy? You were in Lod? You can't go to Lod. Lod's a dangerous place. It's full of Arabs and Bedouins." I said, "They're actually very nice people." And they were very pleased I was there. And he said, "I would never do that. You're nuts." I said, "Have you ever gone to a checkpoint?" He said, "We're not allowed to go to a checkpoint. Israelis can't go through the checkpoint unless they live in a settlement." I said, "But you can go to a checkpoint and see what's going on there. It's very unsettling. It's very upsetting." And he said, "Listen, man, I live in Tel Aviv. I'm never going to a checkpoint. I don't want to see it. I would rather be ignorant." Wow, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
That's a big problem. I'd rather be ignorant of it than have to face the pain of knowing that my solution to the problem is so hurtful and angry. You know, Thomas Friedman wrote a article last week in which he said essentially the Israelis are being censored and not allowed to see the extent of the damage done in Gaza. Well, again, powers that be believe that they have solutions, and those solutions have to be uh, permeated on the population. If Jews saw the horror of what their brothers in Gaza were going through, they would be horrified. They'd be upset. They know what happened to them on October 7th, which was terrible, but they don't want to see what's happening to tens of thousands of Arab people, children, women. They don't want to know. So here's our problem. Here's our problem. You're right. Ignorance. Ignorance is high. Self-preservation is high. Let's call it self-preservation rather than greed. The reality is when those two things are high, unless we lower them. We reduce the ignorance and intend, give knowledge and reduce the self-preservation and show that mutual preservation is more important and in our best interest, we can't make progress unless we do that.
Okay. Let's end on these last two things.
Yes.
First, um, from a personal standpoint, from a one-on-one discussion, if someone is having, how do you recommend that they deal with that on an individual basis with an individual they speak to? How do they deal with that? How do they lower ignorance and self-preservation in an individual that they're talking to?
Well, first of all, I think we have to listen. Now, you're a psychiatrist. You're good at listening. You're listening to me. Um, you're
I don't know that
you're
that would be completely true. I don't know if my wife would agree with that, but okay.
all
I
right. But
appreciate the compliment.
yes, and so the fact is, we have to demonstrate to the other that we want to hear their concerns. And then we want to hear how they believe those concerns are best taken care of. So, for example, we have millions of Americans who are afraid of immigrants. Now, we then have to ask them, okay, how do we deal with these tens of millions of immigrants in our country and those coming? And what happens when you use your solution? Well, I think what's going to happen is Donald Trump keeps saying he's going to get the army to round up millions of people to deport. Okay, what then happens to your economy? What's going to happen? Who's going to do your lawn? Who's going to fix your house? Who's going to do the jobs of picking crops that these people do now that you are deporting tens of millions of people? What's going to happen to the children of these people who are Americans and are being left behind? Who is going to care for them? How do you answer those problems? So rather than lecture to them, I would do what you do, Dimitri. I would ask questions of them. I hear your solution. Now let's see how it works. Are you willing to look at whether your solutions have merit? And what will be the consequences of those solutions you want to implement?
Okay. All right. And finally,
Yes.
what is your prediction for the next 4 years? How do you see this? How do you see this going?
Well, I hope that my relatives in Florida don't drown. Um,
Okay.
I hope that there aren't too many more mass shootings down in Florida. I hope that people start to see that the people who we're bringing into power are out of their minds. I would say it more dramatically, but I'll leave it at that. Out of their minds. A guy with a worm in his head is going to be at head of our health and education services. Our attorney general is a total flake. Um,
That's
these,
a nice way to put it.
yeah, he's a dangerous person. We're going to have chaos. I'm pretty much sure that these people coming into power are going to do what they say they're going to do. And I'm going to keep asking the people around me who voted for them, which are not much in Massachusetts. You can't blame blue states. Um, we we're going to keep asking, is this working? Yeah, taking the fluoride out of the water good for your teeth? Is this working? Is it working that you don't have a gardener anymore, that there's nobody uh, to work doing construction on the construction jobs? Are you not concerned that there are no more avocados being picked in California? What are you going to do now that you have put these folks in charge.
So your prediction is chaos.
Yes.
Okay.
And an
All right. Well,
opportunity for you and me to talk to people and say, hey guys, how do you like how this is working?
so basically the fuck around and find out kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All
That's
right.
about the best I can offer.
Okay. All right. Well, actually, that's also my prediction. Is that's kind of the thing. I'm of the mind that people get the government they deserve,
Yes.
and people wanted this, so they're going to get it.
Yep.
And so, but look, I am happy that you came back on here. I'm sorry that we have to keep doing this during these kinds of times. Maybe one of these times you'll come on and it'll be a lot better.
Hey, Dimitri, I hope so. Listen, I really enjoyed talking with you. And uh, if you can't find any guests, I'm willing to come back anytime and talk.
Hey, and again, next time maybe we won't have to talk about evil people. We can talk
All
about
right.
like really
Tell
nice
people to
people.
buy my book. You know, after the last time I spoke, I didn't get any sales in Florida.
I don't know what happened. It was a popular episode. Put the book up. The Roots of Evil. There it is. Evan Longin. It's on Amazon, every place you can buy books. Um, Thank you
Hey,
again.
Dimitri, be well. Good luck in Florida.
We're gonna need it. We're gonna need it. Thank you again.
Yeah, bye.